Hey everybody, it's Matthew. Welcome back to the channel. I've finally moved into a new location here. It took me a while, but we're finally back to making regular content. So it's March now, obviously, and that means a very special thing I'm going to start. We're going to be calling it Soundgarden Month. So every March from now on is going to be Soundgarden related content. Every time. I hope you guys will enjoy that idea. Reason for that being, of course, SUPERUNKNOWN came out in the month of March, and I think they had another album come out in March. I'm not positive about that, so perfect time to be doing that, of course. Hopefully the audio for this video isn't terrible. I have my microphone over here, but I don't know if it's picking up anything particularly well. If it's not, we'll just use the camera audio, and it'll be fine. So anyway, what are we going to be doing today? Well, today I thought it would be fun to do a little Soundgarden fun facts video today. Talk about some things maybe you didn't know about the band, or just expanding on some things and giving you more information about something you might have already known. So without further ado, we're going to get right into this one. So we all like Soundgarden, and we all know they started sometime in 1984, but does everyone actually know the whole story about how the band came together? Of course, the earliest parts of this were childhood friends Kim Thale and Hiro Yamamoto, who are of course the original guitarist and original bassist for the band, who were both from Seattle, and then early on in their life moved to Chicago, where they became friends. Bonded a lot over the weird music that they like to enjoy. Eventually decided to move back to Washington for school and things like that. Initially moved to Olympia, but of course not being able to find any work there, quickly moved to Seattle, where Kim was a DJ for the local college radio station, and Hiro was of course going to school and playing in various bands. All the while this happening, Chris Cornell, growing up in the Seattle area, having a band when he was a teenager, eventually joins a local cover act called The Shimps, which kind of had a semi-irregular roster of musicians. It was changing all the time, and supposedly the band leader was basically homeless and kind of just crashed on whoever band member's couch he could rope into being in the band. And of course, Hiro would join this band as a bass player. Chris at the time was a drummer, and then eventually he did start trying to do vocals, things like that. Eventually Hiro left the band. Kim replaced him on bass. Very interesting. So all of the band members had met each other already at this point. Eventually band breaks up. Chris no longer has a roommate, so he ends up having to leave where he's living. And eventually he calls up Hiro, only to tell him he had the rest of the money he owed him for a bass he had purchased from Hiro. Hiro, of course, not having a roommate and needing somebody else to help him cover the rent, asked Chris if he knew anybody who needed a place to live. And of course, Chris was that person, and they quickly moved in together, started jamming, decided to start a band, and tried out various guitarists to create a cohesive three-piece with Chris on drums and vocals, Hiro on bass, and then whoever they could find that was good enough. Went through several guitarists, eventually hearing Kim audition, which Chris never knew he played guitar, even though they were in the Shimps together. He only saw him play bass. And eventually, you know, he tried out for the new band Hiro and Chris had. Chris liked his style very much, and then of course Soundgarden is formed sometime in 1984 as a three-piece band. And then it goes on from there. And of course, continuing with the band theme, not everyone is familiar with the whole story of how Ben Shepherd became the eventual permanent bassist for Soundgarden after Hiro had left. So of course we know the things that happened there. Hiro left the band to focus on school and other things, thinking the band was going to basically be as good as it was going to be. And so he left. Also, creative differences. He felt like he wasn't able to contribute that much. So leaving, the band finds Jason Everman to cover bass so they can get through their next tour. He eventually leaves to go play in another band, and then Ben comes along to inject his trademark weirdness and cool ideas into the band, but you may not know how they became familiar with each other. So you go back in time to the 80s there. Most of the members of Soundgarden, I think all of them, Kim especially, knew Ben's older brother at the time, and of course by way of that ended up meeting Ben, and maybe in a more intimate way than you might expect. Ben actually had some bands when he was a teenager, mostly punk style bands. He played guitar because that was his first instrument, and he had a band that allegedly played at a house party at Chris and Hero's house when they were roommates together. And so everybody kind of knew of each other at that time. And of course Ben ended up being a big fan of Soundgarden, even going back to the times when they were still a three-piece band like that. So everybody kind of knew each other well before then, before the eventual, he eventually joined the band. And then what you may not know is Ben actually tried out for the band in 1989, right after Hero had left. And since the band was about to go on tour, and Ben apparently not being that familiar with all of the old material, they ultimately did not have him join the band at that time, and instead went with Jason because he was already a little bit of a veteran. Of course, Ben eventually got what he wanted when they came back in and were ready to go to work on a new album, and there he was, and he was the perfect fit for the band. Alright, so let's go to one of the most interesting songs in the Soundgarden catalog that almost never existed, Black Rain. And even though this song came out in 2010, writing of this song had begun 20 years prior in 1990 for the Badmotorfinger sessions. What happened with that is there were some drum and bass was done, there were a few guitar parts there. Chris had already completed the verse vocals and actually had recorded them completely, and then the chorus was still kind of a work in progress. They had one ready, but Chris didn't really like it. The band was also not very happy with the arrangement at the time, so the song ended up being cut because it was of course not able to be finished in time for the Badmotorfinger record, with the band being sort of at a standstill as to how to make the song work. But of course, fast forward, the band comes back together. They start looking at their old material and things they could maybe release for something in the meantime before they started on their next record. And of course, to go back, find the tracks for Black Rain, and immediately the band, including Chris, was able to remember why they didn't like it at first, and of course went to work to fix it. Of course, with Pro Tools being around at this time, and it wasn't back when they were recording it, the arrangement was very easy to fix, so that was a simple thing to do. All that was left was for the guitars to be overdubbed, and then of course Chris wrote a new chorus for it and recorded it at the time. However, the old verses with their old recordings from 1990 were still used on the official release of Black Rain, which is why you hear a little bit of difference between the sounds of his voice between the verses and the choruses, because one was sung in 1990, the choruses were sung in 2010. That's the big thing with that. And of course, the other interesting thing was the music video that was made was an animated video created by Brendan and directed by Brendan Small, who was one of the co-creators of the Metalocalypse animated comedy series. And of course, the video features Soundgarden facing off against a dangerous alien in their big, large horn mech as the fictional band from the show Death Clock looks on. And then we got another big fact here, and that is how Michael Beinhorn saved SUPERUNKNOWN. Now, of course, we know his contributions with that, of being able to create some pretty massive drum sounds for them and do some interesting layering and things with guitars to make a really large, expansive sound that Soundgarden had not been able to fully realize until Michael Beinhorn came along. And of course, the band chose him because he was famous for not trying to imprint himself on a band's sound and instead facilitated the best version of that band. And so Michael Beinhorn was chosen to work on their new project in 1993 at the time, of course, because it would be recorded the year before that. And what happened there is initially Chris sent him like 12 demos, so you had almost a full album's worth of songs, and Michael listened through them and thought they were pretty boring, kind of derivative, very predictable kind of stuff. And he was kind of surprised and taken a little back by that, and he asked Chris, like, what is going on with these? These aren't really any good. And Chris was like, well, I wanted to write something I thought the fans would enjoy. And that was a real problem because he was kind of writing the same songs over and over at that point. And Michael, of course, told him not to do that, that he should focus on himself and what he wants to write and what he think would be interesting and cool. And of course, Chris said to him, I don't know if that's going to sound like Soundgarden when we do that. And of course, Michael said the obvious, which is if Soundgarden plays it, then it's going to sound like Soundgarden. And of course, that was the motivation Chris needed at the time. He goes back into his basement studio at his house, comes back to Michael with a demo of just 4 songs, only one of which was, of course, the Black Hole Sun demo, which Michael played several times over, because he thought it was such an incredible sounding, interesting thing that had not been done in that style before. So he was really motivated, really excited to get it to work on the new material that Chris had come up with after a little bit of motivation. So there was a chance that Super Unknown would have been a really boring record and may not have even happened if Michael didn't intervene with Chris and tell him what he needed to hear at the moment in order to create some of the most timeless songs of the 90s. And then one more little Easter egg here is Soundgarden's philosophy when it comes to cover songs. As you may not know, Soundgarden has recorded several cover songs in their career as a band, many of which at some point or another were recorded, and you can find them all together on the Echo of Miles compilation album, which among them has also some of their lesser known B-sides and some other silly fun songs that they mostly only play live and things like that, and alternate versions. But anyway, we're going to talk about the covers, and the band did cover several famous artists at the time. The first one being well, actually, the first one they did was FOP, but that's on its own thing. That's on the EP, so that's a separate thing. We're not going to talk about that, but one of the first covers you hear from them is Smokestack Lightning, which is on the debut album, as you might know, is a blues song by blues legend Howlin' Wolf. The band didn't do a whole lot to change that, just, you know, having a heavier guitar sound, and then Chris expands on the range of vocals with that, covering his full range on it almost. Makes it a way different, higher energy song. Of course, they covered Thank You, which is a song Sly and the Family Stone, which is a funk band from the 70s. And with that, they actually slow the song down a lot, add this big heavy riffs on the chorus and the verse, and of course, Chris impresses all with his wide range of powerful vocals on this one. And then the Come Together cover, which is similar, well, it wasn't slowed down, but they replaced the famous bass riff with a weird sounding guitar riff, simplified the bass, add this weird sliding chord part in the chorus, and then add this crazy guitar solo that almost sounds out of tune sometimes with this weird chorus part at the end after it, and it's a really interesting interpretation of the song. The most unique cover of that song you'll probably find. But the most interesting cover in Soundgarden's career is their cover of Into the Void by Black Sabbath. Not only do they improve with their guitar sound and some of their improvisational ideas and a great guitar solo from Kim, but the lyrics of the song are entirely replaced by a speech from the Indian chieftain Sealth, or Seattle, which is, of course, what the city of who the city of Seattle is named for, comes from a speech that was written out in 1887 by Dr. Henry Smith, which is based on a notes he took from the actual speech in 1854 that Sealth had given. Allegedly, this was Ben Shepherd's idea to do this when he found the record of it in a public library, I believe, and they borrowed it from there, and then, of course, replaced all the lyrics of the original Into the Void from Black Sabbath with this speech, which also covered topics like environmentalism and how the expansion by the white man affected the Native Americans at the time. And of course, the arrangement works out great with that. It matches in perfectly. Chris does a great job with delivering a really great vocal on this. And then, of course, the rest is history. And in my opinion, it's a better version of the song than the original one, which could be sacrilegious to say, but it sounds better. It has a very interesting inspiration, and I think, of course, Chris delivers a better vocal. You know, that's, of course, subjective, but I really like it. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this fun facts video about Soundgarden. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Like and subscribe if you did. Don't forget to click the bell to get notifications when new videos are out. This is a fun one. Hopefully there will be more fun videos to come. Perhaps we will get another lesson video. Perhaps we will get the Discog log for Soundgarden this month. Stay tuned. It'll be a fun one. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.